Sure. Hi, my name is Michael. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a female alcoholic. This is a great conference. I'm so glad you started it. But I have to say Ralph is my favorite male speaker. His metaphors are just that rocket. I mean, launched. I don't know how his brain thinks it. He just comes up with these things. I wish I could do it. And I want to say how good it is to see Lee. I miss the heck out of you. I really do. And he was my first host the first time I spoke in the South. I'm from California. And the first time I spoke in the South, Lee was my host. And we just developed a wonderful friendship from that. Anyway, when I crawled through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous 38 years ago, over 38 years, I had a formal 9th grade education. I didn't know how to work. I lived on welfare. I was reduced to prostitution, and I was a thief. And all of that was before I took my first drink at the age of 25. I always swore I was never going to be an alcoholic like my mom, and even though I managed not to take a drink, I did the other things she did. Because that's all she knew, and that's all I knew. That's all I ever saw. But my mom went through a period of really wanting to be sober. And it didn't take me long after I started drinking to really want to be sober, because I started off like I'd been drinking for years. And so we both tried to recover from this disease through the psychiatric effort, different times, but we went to the same psychiatrist. Of course, the result was no, but the good news is today that psychiatrist is a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. We both tried to recover from this disease through the religious effort, different times in different congregations, but the result was the same. And I hate to share this, but I like to share it too. I like to joke around and say I think we drove these two men to drink because the minister's also sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. But one thing I know for sure is that psychiatrist, that minister, and myself are perfect examples that AA works when other things fail. The one thing I have to tell you that we did that was really not too good for those two people that tried to help us is my mom slept with the psychiatrist and I slept with the minister. My sponsor said that's not exactly what AA means by spirituality. I said, well, it felt pretty spiritual to me. Oh, I had to go back and make amends for all that stuff, too. Wow. Step 8 and 9 is my favorite step. But anyway, a little bit about my background. I'm Irish, German, and Cherokee. I just did my hair blonde. It was real black. I had Polly and Mari, if you know her from Toronto, have bugged me for years to shorten my hair and to lighten it. They said it was just too, but that was my natural hair, So, but anyway, I'm having fun like this. So I'm part Cherokee, and I'm illegitimate. And being born out of wedlock today is just not a big deal. But when I was a little girl growing up, it was a big deal. And in my mom's defense, I have a childhood that's really appalling. It's very appalling. But in my mom's defense, I want to share with you a little bit about her childhood, because as bad as mine was, my mom's was worse. This program gave me the ability to have a very loving relationship with my mom, even though she couldn't quit drinking. And I lost my mom 20 years ago. She died of lung cancer. I had the opportunity to practice love and service at home. My sister and I took her home. We had hospice come in. And my mom actually got to die with a little bit of dignity. And I had the ability to get in bed with my mom, hold her all night, and just love her unconditionally. And I had to watch her drink on top of morphine up until the day she could no longer swallow. It's probably one of the hardest things I've done, but one thing I learned from this experience is my whole life growing up, I was so focused on the things I hated about my mom, the things that I didn't want to be like, that I missed all of her wonderful qualities. I'm losing my voice. I missed all of her wonderful qualities, and she had a lot of wonderful qualities. Excuse me. thinking about two of my brothers that have died as a result of drinking. It's because I never talk about them. Anyway, so my mom's childhood was worse than mine. This is what I found out, and this has helped me really forgive her for the things that she taught me. But anyway, I learned, and I didn't learn this until she was dying, that she came from an alcoholic background, and when she was 13, her mother was murdered in a drunken brawl. A drunk slit my grandmother's throat. And that left my mom out on the streets at the age of 13 trying to raise herself because her father was in a chain gang, which is some kind of prison. At the age of 14, she had her first baby, which she gave up for adoption. And then she had me. And she did everything in her power to keep me. She later met a man, got married, had 3 boys. We all moved to California. That marriage soon ended in divorce, and my stepfather moved back to Colorado. So that left my mother in California trying to raise 4 little kids. We were raised on welfare. We were raised in extreme, extreme poverty, always having lights, gas, telephones turned off, always being evicted, even having to sleep in cars. And I had to deal with my mom's alcoholism, I had to deal with her prostitution, and I had to deal with all of her suicide attempts. When I was 12, my mom got pregnant again. And this time she sent my 3 younger brothers to live with their real dad in Colorado. Now, my 3 brothers are my very best friends. I mean, when you're always being evicted and sleeping in cars, you don't have a chance to make friends. So my brothers were my friends. So I feel like at the age of 12, I already had all these feelings that I later brought with me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And those feelings were of low self-worth, low self-esteem, not equal to, and just not good enough. And that was a direct result of all that poverty. The drunken psychiatrist pointed out to me that I had issues of abandonment. You know, I never knew my real dad. My stepdad went away. My 3 brothers went away. My mom's always trying to kill herself. And because of some other childhood experiences, I would say I'm a fear-based person. I've always been afraid of people, places, and things. And the 2 very important things I learned when I got to this program, first, I learned that feelings are not facts. All those things I used to think about myself were not the truth. And best of all, I learned how to walk through fear. And I learned that every time I walk through fear, I'm actually exercising faith. And this last, 25 years or something, I've walked through my 2 biggest fears, and one of them was getting up at the podium. At 4 years of sobriety, I couldn't get up at a podium and read how it works. I couldn't do it. I didn't want to do it. So it's hard to believe that I do it. And the other one is flying. It took me 12 and a half years of sobriety to get on an airplane. And I have to tell you what I found out. I found out I'm not afraid of flying, I'm afraid of crashing. And my sponsor told me I better be clear of what my fear was when I was asking God to remove it. But you know, I am a person that's really a big book person, and I hear a lot of things in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that are not in the big book. And that's fine because it's probably somebody's experience, strength, and hope. I mean, we all have different experiences. But sometimes some of that stuff can confuse a newcomer, and I wasn't even all that new at that time. But there was this old-timer who always said, you cannot have fear and faith at the same time. That if you had fear, you didn't have any faith. And he'd even pass out coins that said that. And I'm always afraid. And I had worked my steps. I've had spiritual experiences. I've had profound spiritual experiences. But I still had all this fear. And I went up to him. I asked him, I said, well, what do you think I'm doing wrong in my program? Why do I still have all this fear? And he told me in the most arrogant, smug way, well, it sounds to me like you haven't taken a thorough 3rd step. Today, I know I had taken a thorough 3rd step. For me, to take a thorough 3rd step is not just saying a prayer. I mean, for me to do a thorough 3rd step is I have to take those actions of 4 through 9. When I take those actions, then I know I've done a thorough 3rd step. But anyway, I went up to one of the old-timers that was instrumental in my sobriety, and I was crying on his shoulder. Actually, I think I was tattling on the other guy for saying I hadn't taken a thorough 3rd step. And anyway, I was telling him what he said about the fear and faith thing. And Bill took me by the hand, and he said, Michael, nowhere in the big book does it say you cannot have fear and faith at the same time. And he took me to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he pointed out a page to me. It's page 68. Wouldn't you know it's under the fear inventory? And he pointed out the sentence, and it says, all men of faith have courage. All men of faith have courage. And then he pointed out to me, you don't need courage unless you're afraid. That was it was like, that's right. And then he took me down to the bottom of that page, and it gives you that fear prayer. God, remove my fear and direct my attention to what you have me be. And I'm always directed to work with another person, whether they're in the program or out of the program. If I can get out of myself, God can get in there and just relieve that fear. So what I did, the first time I had to fly, I had a girl that was going to take me to the airport and boot me on the plane. This is for Alcoholics Anonymous. I had to fly for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was terrified beyond terrified. And anyway, an emergency happened. She got this call, and she had to just drop me off. I'm at LAX in the ticket area, and I know I'm not going to get on that plane. I can't do it. And I come from panic attacks, and I had a major panic attack. I started hyperventilating. My knees were shaking so bad, they buckled on me, and I fell back. And thank God there was a chair there. I fell back into the chair, and I started crying, which is good for me because then that relieves the panic, when I can cry. But the thought of not carrying out an AA commitment was just more than I could deal with, because I learned that early on. That's what we learn to do here in Alcoholics Anonymous when we make commitments. We keep our commitments. And if we can't do it, we get somebody who can. But, so I'm sitting there crying, and I had a little spiritual experience. I had an inner voice talk to me, and it was loud and it was clear. And it wasn't through the ears, but it said, it wasn't very kind either. Usually it's very kind. He said, this voice said, Michael, why don't you get out of yourself and try and help somebody? And I just went, what? This isn't an AA meeting. Then I looked over at the escalators that go up to the planes, and I saw several older people. I'm one of them today. I hate that. Several older people struggling with their suitcases to get them up the escalator. So I ran over there, and I started helping all these people get their bags up the escalator. That worked so well for me. It really did. I really got out of myself and thought about somebody else. That every time I had to fly, I would report to the escalator like I worked there. And when I'm in turbulence, the kind of turbulence where they don't let the stewardess get up, I can't help it. I get into fear, so I always carry pen and paper with me. I pull it out, and I start writing the third step prayer down and putting somebody else in it. Say, like, I offer Ralph to thee to build with him and do with him. I'll write the whole prayer out, and by the time we land, I have everybody I know in the third step prayer, pages and pages. But we've always landed, so I'm amazed that planes really do fly. Honest to God, I really thought they crashed a lot more than they do. I'm not exactly sure why. But I did, doing my inventory, I did realize that I had a friend that died in the Canary Island crash. I don't know if any of you remember it, but it was two jumbo jets still on the ground that collided into each other, and she died in it. And so that might have something to do with my fear, of flying. And I still get a little bit nervous, but nothing like I used to. I can just get on the plane and act normal. I have to act as if a lot. So anyway, that last sentence in that paragraph says, at once we commence to outgrow fear. It doesn't say at once we outgrow fear. It says we commence to outgrow fear. So here I am, 38 years sober, and I'm still commencing. And that's okay because that's covered in step 10 and 11 in the big book. In step 10, it says we're to continue watching for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. It says it's not an overnight matter. It should continue for a lifetime. And then it's reiterated in step 11 on retiring at night. And it comes to that very first sentence. Were you selfish, dishonest, resentful, or afraid? Do you owe an apology? Have you kept something to yourself you should share with another person? Then it asks for some good things too, like were you packing into the mainstream of life? Were you kind and loving toward all? So it kind of gives you, a real good look at the good and the bad. I try to do that all through the day. When I do something that I'm not happy with, I try to do it all through the day. But I still do that on retirement at night, and I do it in writing. I did my 4th step in writing, so I do my 10th step in writing. It's in step 11, but it's the way I do a 10th step. I do my form of prayer and meditation in the morning. I just do what I can. I have a situation at home where it's difficult to manage my time because I have a disabled daughter, not only disabled, bedridden daughter that I'm caretaker to. And so I can't do things as structured as I used to, but I still get it done. Sometime in the morning. If I only say the 3rd step prayer, the 7th step prayer, ask God to direct my thinking and divorce me from selfish, dishonest, self-seeking motives, if that's all I do and the 7th step prayer, that's good enough for right now. And then I do some meditation where I just try to listen to God. I just get quiet. But I always have to take my mind and focus it on something. I can't just not focus it because I got an active mind. So I'll just focus, on whatever I focus on. God, healing, 12 steps. I just try to keep my mind on something, and I'll be quiet for a long time. In that 1937 dictionary that I have, I looked up the word meditation. This is when Bill wrote the big book. And what it said about meditation is it says it's quiet contemplation. It didn't say it was getting in a yoga position and going om or anything like that. It just said quiet contemplation. So I managed to get that in there every day too. So anyway, I'm 13. My mom has this baby. And I had to learn how to be a mom, and I didn't even know how to be a kid. My mom's alcoholism took her out of the home. She was never around. I had full responsibility of this little baby, and this little baby is sleeping in a dresser drawer. I eventually had to potty train her, bottle break her. I'm failing in school because I can't get to school. After doing my inventory, I found out the truth was I hated school anyway. When I went to school, I was either an object of pity around my peers or I was teased about the way I dressed and teased about my hair. So specifically to get out of my home life, I got married at the age of 15. And I have such a colorful past that I like to brag about this. I want everyone here to know when I got married at the age of 15, I was not pregnant. That's very important because my mom was always getting pregnant, But this man lived in the neighborhood. He came from a similar background. And he was 3 years older than me. I had 2 TV shows I used to watch. They were my favorite TV programs. You're all too young to remember this, but it was Donna Reed and Father Knows Best. I just loved Donna Reed. I wanted to be like her. She wore these beautiful dresses with these big skirts on them and lots of petticoats under them and 6-inch heels. And that's how she vacuumed. That was her vacuuming attire. I don't know what she wore when she washed the dishes, but she was always dressed up, hair perfect. So when I got married at the age of 15, I had this wild idea. I was Miss Donna Reed, marrying Mr. Father Knows Best. And fortunately, it didn't turn out that way, and I believe the man I married was an alcoholic. His name was Johnny Walker. Hadn't taken a drink yet, so I didn't have a clue. But I believe the man I married was an alcoholic. He took me through a whole new phase of alcoholism I never experienced with my mom. It's called physical abuse. He never abused me unless he was drinking, but he abused me to the point of cutting me up with a knife, and I had to have surgery to repair the damage. So I got out of that marriage at the age of 18. And I feel like that's when I started on the road of being everything I swore I'd never be, doing everything I swore I'd never do. Hadn't even taken a drink of alcohol yet. I always intuitively knew if I took a drink, I'd be an alcoholic. I want to share a story with you about that sister of mine, because she came from the very same background. And she had to move out of the house at the age of 16 because my mom's disease has progressed. And she took that high school equivalency test. She took it 3 times until she finally passed it. And with this test under her belt, she got a job under a special youth program working for the city of Long Beach. At the age of 26, she retired from the city of Long Beach. She took her 10 years retirement pay and bought her own business. She later married the head traffic engineer for the city of Long Beach, and they're still married. And at the age of 30, my sister was awarded Woman Entrepreneur of the Year. And, I still sometimes don't get it. Same mom, same background, but different reactions. And the difference is my sister's not an alcoholic. My sister is not bodily and mentally different from her fellows. My sister reacts to life situations differently than I do. So today I get to accept responsibility. I can no longer blame people, places, and things. Yes, I am an alcoholic and I have a disease, but today I have a solution. And a big part of my solution is being accountable for my actions, my past actions and my present actions. So at the age of 15, I got married. At the age of 17, I did have a baby. At the age of 18, I had to get out of this marriage. I had a huge spiritual experience way before I ever got to this program. And it was equivalent to the one that Bill has in Bill's story. And as a result of this spiritual experience, I sought out a very specific church. That's where I canceled with that minister. Because I have this huge spiritual experience, but I don't have a plan of action to go with it. And I know the plan of action is what gets you sober. I mean, that educational variety of a spiritual experience is what got me sober. The white light did not. But anyway, so I shared with this minister all my character defects and all my shortcomings, and he assured me if I got really active in this church and I read all these inspirational books and I did all this positive thinking and all these affirmations, I could be everything I ever wanted to be. After I got to this program, I heard a speaker at this podium say, if you're alcoholic, you cannot think your way into right actions. If you're alcoholic, you have to act your way into right thinking. And I'm absolute proof of that because I got really active in that church. I even became the secretary of that church. And I did all that positive thinking, constant affirmations. And the only thing that resulted is I ended up having a torrid affair with this minister, and it absolutely infuriated his wife. The congregation wasn't too excited about it either. Well, they were excited, but not the right kind of excited. So needless to say, I was kicked out of the church. But the one thing I thought I'd take to the grave with me as secretary of that church, it was my job to handle the money. When I handled that money, I stole part of that money. Now, at that point in my life, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt my only hope was God, because I just had a spiritual experience. And I turned to God for help, and I ended up seducing his minister and ripping off his church. So I truly know that feeling of hopelessness that they talk about in the big book. And I'm going to share 2 stories with you while I'm on the subject of the minister. The first story... Okay, the first story I'm going to share with you is how I laughed. I was incapable of laughing when I got to this program, absolutely incapable. And it's very funny, speakers in California. People would burst into laughter, and I would just sit there with a solemn face and think, this is not funny. This disease is not funny. And it took about 2 years of sobriety for me to finally laugh. But I would always hide out in the back of the room. My friend Teddy calls it the half-measure section or the denial section. But I didn't hang out back there for either of those reasons. I hung out back there because I couldn't read very well. And I literally could not say the word anonymity for 6 months. And this is with people giving me lessons, syllable by syllable. Couldn't say anonymity for 6 months. So I'd always hide out in the back of the room. And so 2 years of sobriety under my belt, I think it was Cliff Roach. He's an older speaker. I don't hear of him too much anymore, but he is funny. He is so funny. But he shared something, and I laughed. I had the biggest belly laugh I have ever had. But right after I laughed, I found myself thinking, well, that might be funny for you, but there's nothing in my background I could ever laugh at. And then about, I guess it's been 25 years. I lose track of time. I had to speak at my very first meeting in the area. I was 11 and a half years sober. My sponsor was always trying to get me to talk because I had, the first 10 years of my sobriety, I had amazing things happen. But talking wasn't one of them. And I would grab this book and I'd say, okay, you show me in this book where it says anything about being a speaker. I got away with it for a long time. I really did. But she had pneumonia, and she couldn't show up at this job in the city I lived in, at the speaking engagement. So she asked me, and, I just couldn't say no. She has pneumonia, so I went and I talked. That was the most depressing talk anybody ever gave. I was so depressed, I was thinking about suicide or something. It was just awful. And I went home and I talked to God, and I said, God, if you want me to do this in Alcoholics Anonymous, you're going to have to lighten up my story because I can't do it. And so the second time I talked, my daughter heard that I was talking, and she wanted to come hear me. My daughter got sober for the first time when she was 15 years old, and she got 3 years of sobriety. At the age of 18, she and her girlfriend were leaving an AA dance. They were in the parking lot of the dance. A man came up to them with a gun, kidnapped these two women. And he beat the one girl unconscious, and he brutally raped my daughter for over 2 hours. And I just never heard of some of the things that he did to her. She couldn't have children afterwards. But it took her 2 years to remember that she did say a quiet prayer to live. This man had a bottle of alcohol in his pocket that he drank throughout the whole ordeal, so he got quite drunk. And at the point where he was forcing my daughter into the trunk of the car, somehow she just got the courage to make an effort to save her own life. And she totally caught him off guard because she had been totally submissive up until this point. She caught him off guard. She swung around with her elbow and she got him in the face. And because he was so drunk, he fell. The gun slid under the car. She ran down the street naked, and she got away. He took off with the other girl still in the car and rolled her out in the street somewhere. So both girls lived, but the road of recovery was real hard, and it was real long. And sometimes you think she's past it, and then something happens, and it reoccurs, like a smell. Some smell that reminds her of it, it's just been a real hard thing to deal with. Anyway, she wouldn't leave the house for 2 years. But when she finally started leaving the house and she started working again as a hairdresser, she started using again. I managed to stay sober through all this. However, when my daughter was kidnapped, I have to admit, I had a real hard time in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a spiritual program. There was a sentence in the big book that really bothered me, and it's on 3rd edition, 449, 4th edition, 417, talks about acceptance. And I love the part on acceptance, but that one sentence says, absolutely nothing in God's world happens by mistake. Clancy says, alcoholism is a disease of perception. I'm still an alcoholic. I still get my disease of perception. Because I perceived that to mean that if nothing in God's world happens by mistake, then that had to be an act of God. I wanted to leave Alcoholics Anonymous, and I wanted to leave God. Because I knew I didn't want any part of a God that could operate like that. And thank God for a man named Bill Honeycutt. He just took me by the hand, and he said, Michael, God is good, and good is God. And if it's not good, it's not of God. He said, man has free will. That man was acting on his free will. Your daughter was just a victim. He said, if man didn't have free will, we wouldn't all be sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'd all be perfect people. And when he told me that, I just had a huge spiritual release. And I know for me, He was telling me the truth. And that's probably what I know about God today, is that God's good and good is God. And if it's not good, it's not of God. And that really helped my daughter. And so anyway, she was in and out of the program, she'd get a sponsor and try and get sober, and the sponsor would say, you have to forgive him. You have to forgive the perpetrator. She'd try to forgive him. She'd get drunk. She'd get another sponsor, same thing. You have to forgive the perpetrator. She'd try and forgive. She'd get drunk. I mean, over and over. I just think when it comes to forgiving stuff like that, all you have to do is be willing. Because you can't force that kind of forgiveness. You can't. But my daughter was willing because she didn't want to feel those feelings. And it happened in God's time. It was 9 years. And it happened in God's time where she was able to forgive him. And that's a story all in itself. But anyway, this is the time she was trying to get sober. Actually, it's the time she was trying to get sober for the last time. She has 25 years now. But anyway, the second time I had to speak at a meeting, she wanted to come hear me. She brought some of her program girlfriends with her. And we sat down at the coffee at our table at my house and had coffee before the meeting. And she proceeded to tell her girlfriends my drunk-a-log. I just never thought some of this stuff looks through the eyes of a 9-year-old. She's 9 years old. She's telling these girls I'm dragging her off to church every day. She's learning things like the 10 Commandments, the Golden Rule. I'm constantly preaching all this religious stuff to her. She comes home from school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She opens the bedroom door, and there, naked in bed with her mom, was the married minister of the church. When she first said this, I just felt appropriate feelings. I felt guilt, embarrassment, shame, and compassion. And I looked at my daughter and I said, God, honey, that had to be a terrible shock. I used to cry at this, and I don't know why it makes me laugh now, but it does. It's the first time I ever laughed. She looked at me and she said, Mom, I don't know what shocked me the most, seeing that minister naked or seeing his artificial leg on the floor. Up until that time, I forgot he had an artificial leg. It was a huge leg. I don't know how I forgot it. But trust me, in the way that was important, he wasn't disabled. I'm giving myself a hot flash up here. So anything that might make you chuckle that I say, my daughter gave me that night. And I've always kept it in my story because what a healing thing that is. I mean, laughter's healing. It truly is healing. And if you don't have a sense of humor, get one. That's what my sponsor said, get one. So anyway, still talking about the minister. And 8 and 9 comes in here. I have my inventory done. People get a huge relief with step 4 and 5. That didn't happen for me. There was no relief for me. I'm looking at step 6, and I went through the steps. When I got sober, everybody was trying to do the steps out of the 12 and 12. I just don't see how you can do it. I mean, I didn't drink, but it just didn't work for me. And I heard about this group. They were sponsees of Dr. Bob's. And I had to drive a long ways to meet with this group. And they took me through the steps. They took me through the first 3 steps in a formal manner. They sent me home 2 weeks to do my inventory, went back, and they took me through 5, 6, 7, and 8. And they do a formal 6th step where they write about it. And there's a page on the book that explains it. And then afterwards, they handed me these old mimeograph sheets. Do you guys know what mimeograph sheets are? That purple stuff that smears all over everything. I don't know how they had so many of them, but they did. They handed me all these old sheets of paper, and they said, now, this is what we've done with you, and you have to go out and do it with another person. They believed in doing it right away, not making a month, a year, whatever people do now. And I'm so thankful I got that. That was before Joe and Charlie. I got the big book handed to me by those old timers, and I am so thankful. But anyway, so on my step 8, what I had to do is do it in 3 columns. The first column was short-term amends that I could do within 6 months. Second column was long-term amends, which was usually financial. And then the third column was amends you can't make, like for people who are deceased or whatever. And so I didn't have a lot of money. I did have a job, but I didn't have a lot of money. So I couldn't pay anything back in one lump sum. So I had to do everything in payment schedules. And the first thing I had to address was the minister and the church. So I went back to him and I told him I used to steal out of the church funds, and he told me he knew that. Then I told him, well, I used to steal out of your wallet when you were in the shower. He said, no, I didn't know that. So I made restitution to him, and I set up a payment schedule to pay back the church. And I'm still sending money to the headquarters, and it's not because I have to, it's because I want to. You know, I want to. I called their prayer line when it was time to get sober, and it got me sober. And so I feel indebted to them that they got me to Alcoholics Anonymous. But anyway, when I went back to that minister, he shared with me at that time he knew exactly what I was doing. By the time I got to him, he had 2 years of sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he shared with me that when he lost his leg, he was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he actually died on the operating table. He had a near-death experience, which for him was his spiritual experience. And that's what led him into ministerial school and becoming a minister. And even he couldn't get sober in church. I'm not putting down churches, and I'm not putting down the psychiatric effort, because the big book makes it real clear that this program owes a lot to both of these institutions. But I have to tell you, for me, it was all about that miracle that happens when one drunk reaches out to another drunk. So I'm kicked out of this church. I'm living in an apartment I'm being evicted from. That's my normal MO. Lights and gas had been turned off for a long time, but I still had a telephone. And I got a call at 11 o'clock at night, and I couldn't believe the man on the other end of this phone. It was my real dad. And he wanted to make amends for not being in my life. He wanted to get to know me and get to know my daughter. And he offered me an opportunity to move to Colorado. I didn't have any desire to get to know him, and I didn't want to move to the snow. But I had no place to go except for out on the streets. And I think deep down inside I had this little hope. If I did this geographic, maybe I could change. So I made that move to Colorado, and I lived there for 3 months. And in that 3-month period, he and his family could not wait to get me out of Colorado. In that 3-month period, I ended up having affairs with the bus drivers on the way over there, getting pregnant, having an abortion, falling down the stairs and breaking my leg, ripping off his medicine cabinet, ripping off his booze cabinet, ripping off his money. Can't imagine why they wanted to get me out. So, I'm going to tell you how I broke that leg. Obviously, I was drunk. And I lived in a second-floor apartment, and the liquor stores closed at 12. I didn't have a car. I had to make my final liquor run, and I'm drunk as a skunk. And I am walking down the stairs, hanging onto the railing with my right hand. My daughter's on the left side of me, trying to hold me up. And I noticed another second-floor apartment door opened because I was staring right at it, and out of that door walked a priest. I mean, the collar, the robe. He's definitely a man of God. And I'm angry at God. I'm angry at God because I just seduced his minister and ripped off his church. So now I'm mad at God. And I looked up at that priest, and I flipped up my middle finger, and I screamed, "F you, God." And I immediately fell down the stairs and broke my leg. My daughter told me that is the day she started believing in a punishing God. Today, we both know it had nothing to do with God. I fell because I was drunk. So anyway, my real dad was second on my list of amends to make when I made my amends. And I wrote him a letter. I told him I was sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and I wanted to make restitution for my behavior up there. I set up a check, trying to set up a payment schedule. They sent me the check back with a little note that said they didn't want my money and they never wanted to hear from me again. I don't know why I took it so hard. You would have thought I knew him my whole life, but I didn't. But I took it real hard. And the people in Alcoholics Anonymous pointed out to me, I don't make amends to be forgiven. I don't make amends for any of those reasons people think they're making amends. I make amends to clean up my side of the street. I make amends to stay sober. So all I can tell you is that the actions I took worked. They worked. And with my sponsor's permission, every Father's Day and on every birthday, I would send him a card. And I would tell him I was still sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I still wanted to make restitution. I did this for 6 or 7 years, and he never acknowledged me. The last time I sent a card, I don't know if it was his birthday or Father's Day, I got a reply back that week. And when I saw that return address on the envelope, I cannot tell you how excited I was. I ripped open the envelope, and the only thing that was in it was a picture of his tombstone and the obituary out of the newspaper. He just died. And that was the family's way of telling me not to bother trying anymore, and there are no words to express the kind of pain I felt. You know, in the big book, those promises come after step 9. It says before you're halfway through, you're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. You won't regret the past or wish to shut the door on it, so on and so on. Thank God I did not have to wait to get through halfway through step 9, because it took me 12 years to finish my amends. And that happened to my first amends, going back to that church. Then I started feeling the feelings that people told me they got with 4 and 5. I started feeling release and relief, like I was walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. But boy, when I looked at that list of character defects those guys made me write down, and yes, that's what they had me do, write the opposite. I practiced the opposite, and I no longer look at the defect. And but anyway, I got this huge list of amends to make. Most of them are financial, because I was a thief. And so I started tackling them as I could with the job I had. I was supporting myself and my daughter, but that was great. I was self-supporting through my own contributions for the first time and trying to make my amends. I couldn't come to anything like this because of the amends I had to make. I either had to take care, do the deal, or just go sit out and have fun with everybody, which I love. I love these things. I love them. But there's a lot of years in my early sobriety. I didn't have a car for the first 5 years of my sobriety. In fact, the meeting where I first went to, they gave me a coffee commitment. And I had to take a bus to go get all those cups and all the coffee and all the cookies and take a bus from the store to the meeting. I had too much pride to ask for a ride. But they always gave me a ride home. They always gave me a ride home. And you should have seen what I looked like. I was a sight to behold. When I was drinking, I was blonde. I tried to bleach my hair all the time, and I would fall asleep with the bleach on my hair. So I had patches of bald spots. and it's orange. It's an ugly orange, patches of bald spots, and black roots because I didn't bleach it for a couple months. So it'd be in style today, but it wasn't in style back then. I was huge. I was very obese. I wore big purple serape to cover my body. I was an alcoholic woman that did not bathe because I didn't have electricity or gas. And they gave me a coffee commitment. I think about it today and I think, boy, they really were willing to go to any length, you know. And they did. They would always tell me I made the best coffee. They'd come in there and they'd fuss over me, and I made so many friends doing that coffee commitment, you know, them coming up to the coffee bar. I'm so thankful for that. And I'm thankful that that they were willing to drink that slop I was making, because I never made coffee. I never drank coffee. But anyway, those are the things that I did, to try and help give back when I was really new. So I've got my first job. My sponsor told me I'd be fully self-supporting through my own contributions. I don't know how to work. Every job I applied for, they would not hire me because I didn't have a high school diploma. I went back to my sponsor and I was telling her about it and how upset I was that I just couldn't get a job. And she said, Michael, I think God's law is higher than man's law. I think God would rather have you lie on your application so you can become self-supporting than to be on welfare for the rest of your life. So now I've got permission to lie on my application. I went out there, I applied for that job, and that felt really weird because I was really practicing honesty, and I lied and I said a high school diploma. And then I thought to myself, keen thinking, well, shoot, I'm lying anyway. I might as well say I have 2 years of college. I got that job. I was there for a total of 10 years, and I'd worked myself up to assistant administrator. Actually, I even worked there 2 years after I quit. I went to work for musical theater industry, so I was working 2 jobs and going to school at night. They didn't have the GEDs like they have now. They didn't have classes for them. And so I went back to high school, and I graduated from high school in 1985, and I was 36 years old. And I graduated with a cap, a gown, a real ceremony, and 450 18-year-olds. They were what you call incorrigible, and so they were kicked out of day school. They had to go to night school, but I fit right in with them. And I made amends to the company that I lied to about my high school diploma. So that was a little amends. I had things on my step 8, like I ran out on I owed a landlord $1,000 that I ran out on, and when I tried to find him, he was from another country, and I had people in the program that were real estate people, and they could look up records because I couldn't find him, and they found out he had moved back to his country. I had a sponsor that did not believe, and this is fine if your sponsor does. I'm not judging, and I think that's good for you. But my sponsor knew that I needed to clean this crap out. So there was no, well, if you could, you would. No. She said, okay, well, then you make that payment schedule, you make that to a homeless shelter until you pay off $1,000. I had ran out on a dentist bill in Colorado, and I could not remember the name of the dentist for anything. Nobody in Colorado would talk to me. So my sponsor said, you go to a dentist in your area, and you give them that money, and you tell them to apply it to the bill of someone who can't pay. So that's how I made that amends. She gave me something to do on every financial amends that I couldn't, I couldn't do. And I am very thankful for that, because that's what I needed to do, because every time I did something like that, I could just feel myself getting lighter. Because I was weighed down with this garbage. It just weighed down with it, and I could feel myself getting lighter. But I really want to share an amends with you that I made in sobriety. And I really didn't owe an amends, but my Frank Honeycutt, Bill's brother, used to say, fancy to real, fancy to real. When I married my husband and I moved to Georgia, all those people who heard me talk in Edisto Beach really loved me. But you go marry one of their bachelors, they're not quite so loving. And this one girl really didn't like me. She didn't like me for anything. And the taper who taped around our area was my husband's sponsor. And now I'm going and I'm grabbing newcomers. I'm getting them out of Hope House. I'm working with all these women, and these women are telling me things about the taper, my husband's sponsor, that were just making me madder and madder and madder, because his actions were not appropriate for newcomer women. And then I saw him somewhere in a dark corner, and he had one of my newcomers there. I went over there and I yanked her out of that corner, and I said, "You stay away from my newcomers." And so he didn't like me either. And he and this girl were really good friends, so I don't know how long they talked about me, but my husband's sponsor and I just watched each other for a while, for a couple of years. And I watched him make tapes for people who couldn't read, that they could listen to hear the big book. I watched the things that he did do to save Central Office. I watched what he contributed to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I didn't have to look at the one defect he hadn't addressed yet. And I know that's the last defect that usually people address, is their sex conduct. And I really started liking him. I really started liking and admiring him. And he's watching me too. He's watching me grab every newcomer I can get hold of, moving them into my homes. We've had anywhere from 1 to 6 newcomers living in our home. At that time, we had a 4-bedroom house, and it was just my husband and I. And Leon really started respecting me, and what he did when I really realized everything was good between us, my sponsor and I did a workshop together on the 12 steps, Polly and I. And Leon got hold of that set of tapes, and he made me a gold set of tapes. They were gold of the whole workshop we did with this beautiful dome over the top of it, and he gave it to me for my AA birthday. And every time I'd see him in a meeting, he'd grab me and he'd call me Honey Bunch, and everything was good between us. The last time he was speaking at one of our meetings, and Ted and I went to hear him, I remember him grabbing me and calling me Honey Bunch. The next morning, we got a phone call. He died in the middle of the night, heart attack. And that was really sad. It was really sad. But anyway, his family asked us to try to keep the memorial service or the funeral, whatever it was, light. Maybe some of us could get up there and share some of our experiences in AA with the congregation. And that's what we always did in California. I mean, we laugh. We laugh at the things that we remember about people. And so the girl that didn't like me didn't know Leon and I were good. She didn't know that. I guess she still thought he hated me or something like that. She's sitting in the first pew, we're sitting in the second pew. And I can see her the whole time going like this. And anyway, they asked people to come up and to share some experiences about Leon. Nobody would go up. And I kept hitting my husband, and I said, "Go up there." And he says, "No, I can't." I said, "Go up there. Someone's got to start it." He wouldn't go up there. So I started to go up there. And I had something funny I was going to share about him. And the girl in the front pew that didn't like me, she stood up as I was walking up those steps, and she said, "Don't you dare! Leon hated your guts," in front of 300 people. And I could barely get up at the podium and tell the story. I mean, I was devastated. I was so hurt. I sat back down and I cried, and I couldn't stop crying. And I didn't want to go out where everyone else was going out because of embarrassment. And I had another woman take me home. This is the only fight my husband and I had ever. He came home and he threw a fit that I was hurt over that. That I should be better than that. And I yelled at him and I said, "I'm not an effing AA guru. I'm a human being." I went in my bedroom and I started crying. So he went to this other person that was his new sponsor, and he came back and he made amends to me, which was very nice. It's the only fight we ever had. He just thought I was so superior, and so, but this really bothered me. I was so bothered by it. I was so hurt. Everybody in AA there knew it. It just devastated me, and I had to go speak at 3 back-to-back conferences, and at that time I was having back surgeries and I couldn't sit. So we had a conversion van. I could stand, but I couldn't sit. And so the van allowed me to lay lay down in a position. So we drove from state to state for these conferences. But 3 weeks with this in my head was not good. And I knew that I had to make amends to her. I just kept hearing Frank saying, fancied or real, fancied or real. So I wrote her a letter, and I said her name, and then I said, I want to tell you all the things I admire about you. You are so gifted working with autistic children. We are so lucky to have you. I said, you are the best wife to Chuck and his 3 kids. And I just listed all the things that I admired about her. And I said, I don't know what I ever did to you to make you hate me so much. But whatever I did, I'm truly sorry. That was never my intention. Will you please forgive me? And I sent the letter off. I talked to my sponsor about it first, and I talked to the old-timer woman in Augusta first, and she was like, you're going to make amends to her. So I sent the letter off, and I was free. I was free. I didn't have to sit with that anymore. It freed me. And that Christmas, they had no place to go, so Ted said, can we invite them to our house? And I said, sure. And so anyway, they came, and she said, okay, let's get this over with. Let's go talk. I said, okay. We went into my AA room, and she said, that letter you sent me was really stupid. I said, that letter that I sent you set me free. And I just walked out the room. And we've been good ever since. We have been good ever since. We'll be in a meeting together, and she'll brag to everybody about my taking people through the steps. If you want to do a 6 and 7, go to Michael. So that's how the amends process works for me. And it took me 12 years to finish my amends. The last amends I made, I was listening to a tape by Pat Yo, and they would do a workshop on amends. And then she said she felt so guilty because she had one amends she did not make yet. And it was eating her lunch doing this workshop, and it was an amends to pennies. And then I grabbed my list, and that's the last amends that was on my list too, was pennies. I hadn't made it yet. And it was just the store didn't exist anymore. That's why I kept putting it off. And it wasn't a large sum of money. It was so long ago. My roommate she worked there, she asked me to come there and buy something, and she rang it up for practically nothing. It was she put a bunch of clothes for her kid in there, and I walked out with it. And so I also thought a little bit that it was more her thing than my thing. So finally I just threw in the towel, and I wrote a check, and I just sent it to the head whatever for J.C. Penney's. I got a thank you note back, and it said that they have a special chart of accounts for people making amends. Because there's so many 12-step programs. So anyway, I told you I was 6 months sober. I was on my 9th step. And my sponsor told me I had to get a job. Went back to high school, and then I started working for the musical theater industry. And it was such an impressive job. When I got to this program, I didn't have any idea how many zeros were in $1 million. I didn't. And I'm working for this theater having to take these large checks to the bank. I did accounts payable, accounts receivable, and I went back to school. And within, a period of time, I worked myself up to business manager where I handled all of it. And I can't believe, I'm gifted with numbers. I can't remember your name, but I'll remember your sobriety date. It's just, I'm gifted with numbers. And then I met my husband, got married. I felt like I just, when I first started speaking, I just spoke like every weekend. And I'd get on a plane Friday night, come home Monday morning, go to work, and do all my sponsoring during the week. And I was getting to a point where I was just worn out. I was just worn out. I said, God, this is really getting hard. So he sent me a husband that didn't want me to work. I was able to sponsor more people. God just is so good. And we have hard stuff going on in our life, my husband and I. We're waiting for my daughter to die. She has heart failure, kidney failure, liver failure. It's all from having diabetes, and she was under hospice at one time, and that's the first time I ever talked from the podium about her, the first time. So everybody starts praying for her. Her liver's sometimes improved, and they took her off of hospice. And that's why I'm her caretaker today, but I don't know how she's still living. I'm not ready for her to go. You know, I'm not. She's my only child. But I don't know how she's still alive. So that's all up to God. I feel bad about her existence of living. And when I moved her and her daughter in, I no longer take newcomers in, and I really miss that. You know, I'm my best when I'm with you guys. I'm my best when I'm with newcomers. And the one thing I did to ensure my sobriety is I have the soldiers from treatment center at Fort Gordon come to my house every Wednesday night. The counselors, I told them what they're saying in meetings, like a fourth step was an autobiography, and they called it a fourth step. Confronting their parents was the amends step. And so I talked to the counselors, and I said, I'd really like to have them come over to my house. They used to have their meetings in the beginning of AA in their own homes. And teach them that you can have fun in sobriety, you know, and that's what they've all learned, is to have fun in sobriety and get into the big book and get real information. And I've been doing it now for 22 years. Every Wednesday night, they come to my house. And that has been such a gift. It has been a gift. Because all those surgeries I had, you know, there's no way they can open your stomach to get to that side of the spine, take all your organs out and place them all over so we can put these things up and down your spine and not have to take pain medication. I'm sorry, I had to take pain medication. And then you're in a lot of pain with your organs trying to wrestle each other, finding their place. You know, but that surgery, Scott Redmond had that surgery. I didn't even know that this doctor was doing this experimental surgery on me, but that's the surgery that allowed me to walk and sit and be in shape like I am today. So, but I had to take pain medication, and I never took what was prescribed. I was always safe and protected. And I just need to put that out there, because I think if I came in as a newcomer and I thought I had to go through cancer surgery or something and no medication, I think I'd walk out of the doors of AA. You know, I mean, just because we're alcoholics doesn't mean we have to suffer that kind of stuff. You know, it just means we have to do the next right thing to take care of ourselves. Give the medication to your husband or do whatever. So I managed to get through all my surgeries without a thought or a problem with any of that medication. I was not tempted. I don't like it. I like alcohol. So I've been placed in it. And I'm going to share this last story, and I'm going to close with how I came to terms with the God I have in my life today. And I told you how upset I was about that sentence in the big book. I could hear someone share that sentence, even after I had the God I have today, and I would feel absolute rage, just absolute rage. And I sponsored a woman whose tragedy was worse than my daughter's. And she said to me, well, it must be God's will, because in the big book it says absolutely nothing in God's world happens by mistake. I went off on her like a crazy woman, you know, and I started screaming at her that wasn't written by the first 100 alcoholics. It's not in the first 164 pages of the big book. I slammed the book down. I said, it's not even in the first 2 editions of this book. And I looked at her, and she had big crocodile tears coming down her face. And I just felt so bad. And that's when I realized I have a resentment. I have a resentment about something in the big book. And so I really came to a place of being willing to give it up. And I prayed daily for God to just help me with that sentence. And I was in a meeting with my sponsor. And she was sharing about that tape out by Clancy, Alcoholism, Disease of Perception. And when she said the word disease of perception, I had the biggest spiritual encounter that I've ever had. I couldn't hear another word Polly said. I couldn't see anything in the room. It was like a white fog. And I had that inner voice talk to me, and it said, Michael, you know what happens in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous is part of God's world. What happens when you're working those 12 steps is part of God's world. The progression of all good is part of God's world. What happened in that car 9 years ago was man's world. And that's when I really was able to separate man's world from God's world. And I can tell you today, absolutely nothing in God's world happens by mistake. It's God's world that got me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And 2 weeks after I had that experience, I was having dinner with a bunch of drunks in a restaurant, getting ready to go to a meeting. I was sitting next to this little guy, really cute little guy, who was really nice. It turned out to be Dr. Paul, who wrote that sentence. And I was at such peace, I did not have to go off on him and tell him about my resentment, because I knew it didn't matter what he meant when he wrote it. What mattered was how I perceived it. And sometimes I have to work on my perception. So whatever that perception is can work in my life. And that might not work for you, and that's okay, because I truly believe that God works for each one of us at our own level of understanding. I heard if you take one step towards God, God takes 10 steps towards you. And in this lifetime, as we know it, we'll never reach God's level of understanding. But once we're on a spiritual path, God does not want to lose one of us. So he comes to each one of us, and he works for each one of us at our individual level of understanding. And that's why what works for me might not work for you. What works for you might not work for me. But the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous is whatever you believe will work within the 12 steps. And since that day, we became very close, talked at lots of conventions together. He became my spiritual advisor. And he got lots of phone calls about that sentence and lots of letters about that sentence, all from people who suffered terrible tragedies. So we just started giving him my phone number. Thanks, Paul. We lost him in 2000, but when I talk about him, I still feel his presence. Thank you.